Come in. I want to show you something. I found it recently. Or perhaps it found me. That is the way of certain things. You are not looking for them. You are simply living your ordinary life, moving through ordinary rooms. And then one day, there it is, as though it had been waiting. It is a map. Old. Very old. The parchment has the color of things that have been held many times, in many hands, over many years. A deep amber at the edges, fading to something almost ivory at the center. The ink is dark in places and faint in others, as though the person who drew it worked in a room where the light was not always reliable, as though they sometimes had to guess. I have spread it out here, on the table between us. Come and look. You will notice first that it resembles the world. The broad shapes are familiar. Here is what might be Europe. There is something like the coast of Africa, the suggestion of an ocean to the west. You might almost call it a map of our world. Almost. Look more closely. The coastlines do not quite match. There are peninsulas that jut into seas that have no name. There are islands where no island sits in any atlas I have ever opened. The mountain ranges run in directions that no mountain range should run. And the cities. There are cities marked on this map that do not appear in any modern atlas. Cities with names I know. Names that anyone with a fondness for old stories and older dreams would know. But cities that no road leads to. No coordinates will find them. No satellite has ever photographed them from the patient distance of space. They are simply not there. And yet, here they are. I have been studying this map for some time now. I have been moving between its cities the way you might move between rooms in a house you have always lived in, but never quite understood. Learning the distances, listening to what each place has to say. And I thought, tonight, with the hour growing late and the world outside going quiet, I would take you with me. Tonight we are visiting the first section of the map, the section I return to most often, the section that I find, if I look at it for long enough, seems almost to shimmer, as though the ink is not quite dry, as though the cities it shows are not quite finished disappearing. These are the cities that the water took. They were real once, or believed to be, which in the life of a story amounts to very nearly the same thing. They had streets and harbours and people who hung washing between windows and argued about prices in the market and fell asleep watching the light change on the ceiling. They were, in other words, alive. And then the sea came, or the lake, or the river, or simply the slow, inevitable weight of water rising, the way water always rises, the way it has been rising since long before anyone thought to build a city near it. Come then, come and sit with me a little longer. Let the room go soft around you. Let your body settle into whatever is holding it. There is nothing you need to do tonight except listen. I will begin with the most famous of them, the one that started everything, the city whose name became a word for all lost things, all impossible things, all things that we reach for and find only water. I will begin with Atlantis. The story begins with a philosopher. His name was Plato. He lived in Athens in the 4th century before the Common Era, and he was a man who used stories the way a carpenter uses tools, not for their own sake, but for what they could build. He told the story of Atlantis in 2 of his dialogues, works called Timaeus and Critias, and he told it with a specificity that has troubled people ever since. Not the vague, dreaming specificity of myth, but the precise, almost bureaucratic specificity of a man who wanted you to believe he was reporting something real. He gave it a date, 9,000 years before his own time, he said. He gave it a location, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is to say, beyond Gibraltar, out into the open Atlantic. He gave it dimensions, larger than Libya and Asia combined, he wrote, and then he described it, not in the broad strokes of legend, but in detail, in the kind of detail that makes you slow down and reread, wondering how he knew. The island, he said, was laid out in a series of concentric rings, alternating bands of land and sea, like the cross-section of a tree, with a central hill at the heart of it all. On that hill stood the palace and the temple, surrounded by walls that shone. The outermost wall was coated in brass, the next in tin, and the innermost wall, the wall around the sacred heart of the city, was clad in orichalcum. Orichalcum. It is a word that has haunted scholars ever since. Plato says it gleamed like fire, that it was reddish in colour, that it was second only to gold in the esteem of the Atlanteans, and that they mined it from the earth of the island in great quantities. No one has ever satisfactorily identified it. Some say it was an alloy of copper and zinc, what we would call brass. Some say it was a metal that no longer exists, or never existed outside Plato's imagination. Some say it was simply the way that firelight looked on polished bronze, translated into the language of something rarer. Whatever it was, it glowed. The whole citadel glowed, at the center of its rings of land and water, visible from the sea. Inside the city, life had a quality that Plato describes with barely concealed longing. There were hot springs and cold springs both, an unusual luxury, the kind that only the most sophisticated ancient cities possessed, used for bathing and for warmth, with separate facilities for kings and for ordinary people, and for women, and remarkably, for horses and cattle. The racecourse for horses ran around the outside of the outermost ring of land. The harbour was full of ships from every direction, and the noise of commerce and arrival and departure never entirely ceased. And the kings performed a ritual. Every 4 or 5 years, by turns, the kings of Atlantis would gather in the temple of Poseidon at night and hunt bulls. Not with iron weapons. Iron was forbidden in this rite, as though the newer metal would desecrate something older. They hunted with wooden clubs and ropes, catching the animals by strength and patience, and when they had one, they would lead it to the great pillar at the center of the temple, the pillar on which the laws of Atlantis were inscribed, and sacrifice it there. The blood ran down over the writing. The laws were renewed in blood. The kingship was renewed. It is a strange detail, specific in a way that myths rarely bother to be, and it is the kind of detail that makes you wonder, again, where Plato was getting his information. He claimed it came through Solon, the great Athenian lawgiver who had visited Egypt and been told the story by priests at Sais, who said it was 9,000 years old, preserved in their records when Greece itself had forgotten. Whether this chain of transmission was real, or whether Plato invented it to give his parable authority, no one can know. The priests of Egypt kept records that Athens did not. Something could have been passed down. Something usually is. What Plato is unambiguous about is why the city fell. The Atlanteans in the beginning were more than human. They were the descendants of Poseidon, who had fallen in love with a mortal woman named Clito and built the island for her, shaped the concentric rings of land and water with his own divine hands, as a fortress and a gift. Their civilization, for many generations, reflected this origin. They were wise. They were fair. They held their extraordinary wealth lightly, the way you hold things lightly when you understand, genuinely and in your bones, that things are not the point. But divine blood thins. Across the generations, the portion of God in the Atlanteans became smaller, and the portion of human larger. And as it thinned, something changed. The wealth that had once meant nothing to them began to mean everything. They grew ambitious. They looked at the lands beyond their island and saw territory rather than neighbors. Their civilization, which had been magnificent, became merely powerful. And power, Plato suggests, quietly, without laboring the point, is what magnificence becomes when it forgets what it was for. Zeus saw this. He called the gods together. He began to speak. And here, the account breaks off. Plato's Critias ends mid-sentence, mid-speech, the judgment of Zeus forever unfinished. Whether Plato never completed it, or whether the ending was lost, no one knows. We do not have the words. We only know their consequence. That in a single night and day of cataclysm, the island was swallowed by the sea, and the Atlantic continued as it always had, indifferent, offering nothing. People have been looking for it ever since. The search for Atlantis is one of the longest unbroken obsessions in human history. In 1882, an American congressman named Ignatius Donnelly published a book arguing that Atlantis had been the origin of every great civilization on Earth, that the gods of Greece and Egypt and the Americas were simply memories of Atlantean kings, that all mythology was Atlantean history in disguise. The book went through 50 editions. It made Donnelly famous. It has never entirely gone out of print. Expeditions have searched in the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean, off the coast of Spain and Portugal, in the Azores, in Antarctica. Every few years, someone announces they have found it. The sonar images turn out to be natural formations. The ruins turn out to be something else. The announcement dissolves, and the search continues. There is a theory, held by a significant number of serious scholars, that the kernel of the Atlantis myth is the volcanic destruction of Thera. Thera is the island now called Santorini in the Aegean, and around 1600 BCE, its volcanic center collapsed catastrophically into the sea. The explosion was one of the largest in recorded geological history. It sent tsunamis across the eastern Mediterranean. It buried the Minoan city of Akrotiri under meters of ash, a city so well preserved that archaeologists have found bread still in its ovens. It darkened the sky across a vast area. It may have ended the Minoan civilization entirely. If the memory of that catastrophe passed through enough generations of telling, distorted by time, displaced from the Aegean to the Atlantic, inflated from a large island to something the size of a continent, it might have arrived at Plato as a story about a great civilization swallowed by the sea. The Minoan city of Akrotiri had hot and cold running water. It had multi-story buildings. It had art of extraordinary sophistication. It was, by the standards of its time, remarkable. And the sea took it. But I think the most interesting question about Atlantis is not where it was. It is what it is for. Because Atlantis keeps being found, in the imagination if not in the sonar data. It keeps being needed. Every generation finds it again, in a different ocean, with a different shape, serving a different argument. The Nazis sent expeditions to prove it was the origin of Aryan civilization. New Age movements found in it the origin of spiritual wisdom. Environmentalists find in it a warning about civilizations that outgrow their relationship with the natural world. The city changes. The need stays the same. We need Atlantis to have existed because we need to believe that greatness is possible, that somewhere, at some point, a civilization got it right, or almost right, right enough to be worth remembering. And if it existed, then the fact that it is gone is not the whole story. It was there. It was real. And under the water, in the cold dark, the orichalcum still glows. Let that thought settle into you now. The image of a city glowing at the bottom of the sea. The walls that shine where no light reaches them. Let your breath slow. Let the weight of the day move down through you. The way weight always moves. Toward the earth. Toward the deep. Toward rest. Now I want to show you a city that fewer people know. A city on a different part of the map. Further north, up into the grey cold waters of the Baltic Sea, where the sky in winter sits so low you could almost touch it, and the light comes at angles that make ordinary things look ancient. Its name is Vineta, and its story begins not with a philosopher, but with a chronicler, a man named Adam of Bremen, who in the year 1075 wrote a description of the known world and included in it an account of the greatest city he had ever heard of. He had not been there himself. He was working from reports, from travellers' accounts, from the accumulated testimony of people who had passed through and come back changed. But he wrote about it with the confidence of a man who knew what he knew. And what he wrote was this: that Vineta was the largest city in Europe, that it sat on the southern coast of the Baltic, on or near the island of Wallin, at the mouth of the river Oder, where Poland meets the sea today, that it was a city of extraordinary diversity, Slavs and Saxons and Greeks, and people from further east, all living and trading together. The commerce of half a continent flowing through its harbour. That nothing desirable was unobtainable there. That nothing rare was truly rare, because Vineta had everything. Everything. It is the kind of word that sounds like exaggeration, and perhaps was. But Adam of Bremen was a careful man, a scholar, a churchman, not given to idle fancy, and he wrote it with the tone of someone repeating a fact rather than a boast. In later accounts, the city's wealth takes on a quality that tips into legend. The streets, they said, were paved in a way that even gold would not have seemed out of place. Merchants who dealt in silk thought nothing of using it to patch their sails. The ordinary people of Vineta dressed in fabrics that would have earned luxury goods in any other city in Europe. The contempt for anything less than the finest became, in time, a defining characteristic. Not just of the wealthy, but of everyone. Vineta did not deal in ordinary things. Vineta had elevated itself above ordinary things, and you can perhaps already hear where this is going. The city sank. The accounts differ on the mechanism. Gradual subsidence. A single catastrophic storm. A wave that came without warning from the open sea. But all the accounts agree on the reason. The city had grown proud. Its wealth had become its identity, and its identity had become arrogance, and its arrogance had become a kind of forgetting. A forgetting of what wealth is actually for, of what a city is actually for, of what it means to live in relation to something larger than yourself. And the sea in these stories does not forget. The sea is always paying attention. The island of Wollin is still there. It is a real place in northwest Poland, at the mouth of the Uda, and archaeologists have been excavating it since the 19th century. What they have found is significant, evidence of a large and prosperous Viking Age trading settlement, a place of genuine importance in the Baltic world of the 10th and 11th centuries. A real city, or something very like one, a place of commerce and diversity, and the particular energy that gathers where trade routes cross. Whether the legend of the sinking attached itself to this real place after its real decline, whether Vineta is the story that a faded city tells about itself, the explanation it constructs for its own diminishment, no one can say with certainty. Cities do this. They mythologize their own endings. The story of the proud city, swallowed by the sea, may be what a real city of real importance became in the memory of the people who came after, when the trade routes shifted and the ships stopped coming and the harbour filled with silence instead of commerce. But the fishermen of that coast have their own account. They say, or said, for generations, the saying passing from boat to boat, from father to child, from one winter to the next, that on certain days, when the Baltic is completely still, you can see it. The rooftops, the towers, the streets laid out in their old patterns, perfectly preserved in the cold, dark water, the way cold, dark water preserves things for longer than we expect. And the bells. On very still summer nights, they say, you can hear the bells of Vineta's churches ringing from beneath the surface. The sound is strange, slowed and deepened by the weight of water above it, changed in a way that makes it unlike any bell you have heard on dry land. Not unpleasant, just other. The sound of something that exists in a different medium now, still doing what it was built to do, in the only way it still can. I find something oddly comforting in that image. The bells still ringing, the city still marking its hours, still calling its people to whatever it called them to, even though no one is coming, and the water is very cold, and the world above has moved on and forgotten. Things persist, even when no one is listening, even in the dark. Let that settle into you, the idea of something continuing quietly below the surface, unobserved. Let your own quiet continuity, the breath, the heartbeat, the slow work of the body keeping itself alive, be enough for now. You do not have to do anything. You are simply here. It is enough. We move now from the grey Baltic to the grey Atlantic, from the cold north of Germany to a colder coast still, the coast of Brittany, in the far west of France, where the land ends in granite cliffs, and the sea beyond them is dark green and enormous, and has been telling stories since long before anyone thought to write them down. Here, on this coast, in a bay whose name and exact location has shifted with each telling, there was once a city called Uis, Caris, in the old Breton language. The city below. Some say it was built below sea level from the very beginning, a feat of engineering extraordinary enough to be nearly miraculous, held back from the ocean by a great dike with a single gate and a single golden key that opened it. Others say the sea simply rose around it over the centuries, the way it rises around everything, and that the dike was built in response to that rising, a human answer to a patient and inhuman problem. The king of Uis was a man named Gradlon. He is remembered as a good king, wise and fair and beloved, a Christian king in an age when Christianity was still new along that coast, still establishing itself against something older. The kind of ruler that stories invent to make the tragedy that follows more complete. Because it is his daughter who matters here. It is always his daughter. Her name was Dahut. She was beautiful, the way figures at the center of old stories are always beautiful, not as a fact about her appearance, but as a way of explaining why everything revolved around her. She loved the sea with a wildness that made people uneasy. She held the key to the city gate on a chain around her neck because she had asked her father for it, and her father, who loved her, had said yes. What Dahut was, what she really was, beneath the story the Christian chroniclers eventually told about her, is a question worth sitting with. In the versions that came down through the church, she was a sinner. Her life in Was was a life of excess and carelessness, of pleasures taken without thought for their cost. She organized what the texts delicately call festivities, gatherings that went on through the night, that drew the young and the reckless, that offended the sensibilities of the holy men who watched from the edges of the city. And her lovers, in some versions, did not outlast the night. She was, in this telling, a woman whose appetites were monstrous, and the city's drowning was the consequence of housing her. But there is another reading, an older one. Brittany, in the age when these stories were forming, was a place where the old religion and the new were negotiating, sometimes gently, sometimes not, for the same ground. The old religion had its rituals and its festivals, its particular relationship with the sea and the seasons and the turning of the year. And in some accounts, Dahut is not a sinner, but a priestess. Her gatherings are not orgies, but rites. She is not reckless, but devout. Devout to something the new faith had no place for, something it needed to make monstrous in order to replace. The Sunken, who appears in many versions of the story as the voice of righteous warning, who tells Gradlon to flee, who instructs him, in the most brutal versions, to cast his daughter into the flood, may be less a rescuer than a representative of what was coming, the world that would replace Dahut's world, the faith that would call what she was a demon. In this reading, the stranger who came to Uis and asked for the key was not the devil, or not only the devil. He was the new age, the new order, the thing that Dahut's way of being in the world could not survive. But whatever he was, she gave him the key. She took it from around her neck, the golden key, the only key, and she gave it to him. And he walked to the gate at high tide and turned the key in the lock, and the sea came in. It came all at once, not gradually, not as a rising, but as a wall of dark water that moved through the streets of Uis at the speed of catastrophe, taking everything, the market stalls and the houses and the people who had been asleep in them, and the horses in their stables, and the cats on their windowsills. Gradlon was woken and got to his horse. Morvash, the horse of the sea, who could run on water as easily as on land. He rode. He reached back and pulled Dahut up behind him as he went, riding the flood itself, the city disappearing beneath the horse's feet. And then the saint's voice came. In the versions that take no comfort in sentiment, the voice said, "Cast off the demon behind you." His daughter, the one who had given away the key. He did, or the horse threw her, or she slipped. The accounts are merciful in their vagueness. Dahut went into the water. Gradlon rode alone to the shore and stood there, soaking and ruined and alive. He went on to the city of Quimper, a real city, still there today, and ruled there for the rest of his life. There is a statue of him on horseback between the towers of the cathedral in Quimper, looking out over a city that is not the one he lost. For centuries at the great festivals, a cup of wine was placed in the hand of the statue and then knocked away before he could drink it. A reminder. The king who escaped. The king who left. But Dahut did not entirely disappear. She became something else. Something the sea made of her, or something she had always been, which the sea finally allowed her to become. She is called the Mary Morgan in Breton tradition, and in some accounts Ahes, and she lives beneath the surface of the bay where her city was, a creature of the deep water, sometimes malevolent, sometimes merely melancholy, sometimes presented as having found in the drowning a kind of freedom she never had on land. Perhaps she is still looking for the key. Perhaps she is simply living down there in the cold green water, in the only world that was ever really hers. The bay is beautiful, in the way that places with difficult histories are often beautiful. The water changes colour through the day, blue in morning, grey in afternoon, almost black by evening. The cliffs hold it. The light moves across it. Let the bay be still now. Let the water settle. Let your own water settle. The breath, the blood, the slow tide of the body finding its rest. I want to pause here for a moment. 3 cities on 3 parts of the map. Atlantis, somewhere in the open Atlantic, its exact location forever unresolved. Vineta in the Baltic, its bells still ringing under the cold grey water. Wise off the granite coast of Brittany, its lost daughter still somewhere in the depths of the bay. I have been looking at this map for long enough that I notice things. Patterns in the ink. Similarities between the cities the cartographer chose to mark. All 3 of these cities sank because they deserved to. That is what the stories say. Atlantis, whose people forgot their divine origins and let pride fill the space that wisdom had vacated. Vineta, whose wealth became its prison, whose arrogance became its obituary. Uis, whose gate was opened by someone who had been trusted with the key and should not have given it away. Pride, wealth, recklessness. The sea comes for all of them. There is something in this that feels very old, very human. We have been telling this story in one form or another for as long as we have been building cities near water. The story of the place that had too much and lost everything. The warning that lives inside the wonder. And I find myself wondering why. Why do we keep telling it? What is it that we need this story to do? I think, and this is only a thought, offered gently in the dark, that this story is a kind of mercy, because the alternative is harder. The alternative is that Atlantis sank because tectonic plates shifted and the sea level rose, and the island was in the way. The alternative is that Vineta faded because trade routes moved, because the Danes raided one time too many, because commerce is fickle and cities built on commerce are built on something that can leave. The alternative is that Wise flooded because a storm came in off the Atlantic that was larger than the dike was built to hold, and that Dahut had nothing to do with it, and that no golden key exists, and that the sea does not care about sin or virtue, or the old gods or the new ones. That alternative, the world as a place that simply continues, without moral architecture, without punishment or reward, where cities fall not because of what their people did, but because the earth shifts and the water rises, and everything that is built on something that moves. That alternative is harder to live inside. So we build a story with a shape. We put a reason in the middle of the catastrophe. We say, they grew proud. They forgot what mattered. The gate was opened, and now we understand. The loss has been explained. The world, though terrible, makes sense. I do not say this to diminish the stories. I say it because I think it is one of the most profoundly human things we do. The making of meaning out of loss. The refusal to let beautiful things end without a reason. The insistence that there is something to learn from the water. Perhaps there is. Perhaps Plato was right that civilizations which forget their origins and let wealth replace wisdom tend towards their own destruction. Perhaps that is not a moral law, but simply an observable pattern, and the sea is just a metaphor for all the ways it ends. I turn to the next part of the map, and I find a city that offers no such comfort. We have not moved far, only a little further north and west along this same ragged Atlantic coast, past the tip of Brittany, across the narrowing channel, to the very end of England, Cornwall, the southwest corner of Britain, where the land runs out of itself in granite and gorse and drops into the sea. The people here share more with Brittany than geography. The same old Celtic root beneath the language, the same instinct for the melancholy and the beautiful, the same long memory of a world before the one that is currently in charge. It is not surprising that they also share a coast with stories in it, or something like a city, a land, really, a country that stretched once between the tip of Cornwall and a scattering of small islands called the Scilly Isles, 28 miles offshore. In between those islands and the coast today, there is nothing but sea, cold and shallow and full of the wrecks of ships that did not know the rocks were there. But the sea here is unusually shallow, and the old stories, the very old stories, the ones in Welsh and Cornish and the fragments of texts that predate the Norman arrival, say that the shallowness is not natural, that there was land here, that people walked between what is now the mainland and what are now the islands, over fields and through villages, and that the sea was further away. The land was called Lyonesse, and it is, in the tradition of this coast, the country that Tristan came from. Tristan, of Tristan and Isolde, the great doomed love story that predates and possibly underlies the Arthurian tradition. Tristan the knight, Tristan the harper, Tristan who was loved completely and was destroyed by it. He came from Lyonesse. It was his home, the place that formed him, the place he left. And Lyonesse, perhaps, is the thing that Tristan's story is really about. Not the love, but the origin. The country that made you, and that is gone by the time you think to go back. and then Lyonesse sank. The date, given in one tradition, is the 11th of November, 1099, which is a startlingly specific date for the drowning of a mythological land, and which suggests, perhaps, that the myth has grown around a real event, a storm, a tide, a sudden and catastrophic flooding that people who lived through it remembered precisely, the way you remember precisely things that change everything. Not the year, the day, the 11th of November. There is a man in the story, a man named Trevelyan, in some accounts, who was the first to understand what was coming. The water rising, or the sky changing, or some animal knowledge in him that understood before his mind did. He ran. He got to his horse, and he rode for high ground, and the sea came behind him, and he made it. The Trevithick family, a real Cornish family, with centuries of history in the county, have always claimed descent from this man. Their coat of arms shows a horse rising from the sea. They have carried that image for as long as anyone can remember. The horse that outran the flood, the ancestor who saw what was coming. And here is the thing that Lyonesse offers, that none of the other cities on this part of the map can offer. Nothing. No explanation, no failing, no golden key handed to the wrong person, no divine blood thinned by pride, no excessive wealth that forgot what wealth is for. The sea simply came, the way the sea comes, without malice and without judgment and without any interest in what it was covering. The land was there. The sea wanted it. That was enough. There is something almost more frightening about that. The world is not punishing you. The world simply has its own plans, and your city was in the way of them. But look at this. On clear days, from boats moving over the shallow water between Cornwall and Scilly, you can make out shapes beneath the surface. What might be walls? What might be the boundaries of old fields? The archaeology has found real evidence. Prehistoric field systems on the Scilly Isles that once sat above the waterline. Structures that the sea has been slowly covering for thousands of years. Something was here. Something that people farmed and walked and lived inside. The sea did take it. Whatever it was called. Lyonesse. The lost land. The country that gave the world Tristan and then went under. Quietly. Without drama. Without anyone to blame. Perhaps that is its own kind of truth. Perhaps not every ending has a villain. Perhaps not every lost thing was lost for a reason. Perhaps the sea just rises, and we are left on the shore, looking out at the water, carrying a coat of arms with a horse on it, remembering a name. Let it go under now. Slowly. The way things go when there is no one left to hold them up. Let your body be heavy. Let the heaviness be welcome. We leave the Atlantic now. We leave the grey and the cold and the Celtic rain. We travel east, a long way east, across the breadth of Europe, and into a different kind of warmth, a different quality of light, a different relationship between the land and what is sacred. We travel to the coast of India, to the state of Gujarat, where the Arabian Sea meets the land in a long, warm coastline, and the air smells of salt and spice, and the particular sweetness of a place that has been inhabited for a very long time. Here, the map shows a city that is different from all the others we have visited tonight, different in its nature, different in what its loss means, different in the kind of grief that surrounds it. Its name is Dwarka. and it was the city of a god, Krishna, one of the most beloved figures in all of Hindu tradition, and one of the most complex, a figure who contains multitudes in a way that few figures in any tradition do. The divine child who stole butter from the neighbors and charmed everyone into forgiving him. The young man who played the flute on the banks of the Yamuna River and made the gopis abandon their households to follow the sound. The great teacher who sat with the warrior Arjuna on a battlefield before a war that would change the world and spoke the words that became the Bhagavad Gita. And, in the last portion of his earthly life, a king. He built a city, or rather, he commissioned one. The architect was Vishwakarma, the divine craftsman, the builder of palaces for the gods themselves, a figure who worked in materials and at scales that no human architect could approach. And what Vishwakarma built at Krishna's instruction on a small island just off the coast of Gujarat was extraordinary. The texts describe it with the lavishness that sacred texts reserve for sacred places. Walls of gold, streets that caught the light, gardens where kalpavrikshas, wish-fulfilling trees, grew in abundance, their fruit the answer to any desire a person could name. 70,000 palaces, their fittings of crystal and silver and emerald, a harbour where the ships of every maritime nation could dock, a city built not for commerce or for power, but for beauty. Beauty as an act of devotion. Beauty as the appropriate response to the divine presence at the city centre. Krishna had built it for a particular reason. He had killed the tyrant Kansa, and in doing so, had made an enemy of Kansa's father-in-law, a king named Jarasandha, who commanded vast armies and an implacable will. Jarasandha attacked Krishna's people again and again at Mathura, their original city, and rather than keep fighting, rather than keep spending lives on a conflict that showed no sign of ending, Krishna made a decision. He would move his people. He would build them somewhere the sea would protect them. He would take them somewhere safe. That is the origin of Dwarka. Not conquest, not ambition, protection. The city appears in the Mahabharata, in the Bhagavata Purana, in the Harivamsa, the great texts that form the bedrock of Hindu cosmology. It is not presented as a legend. It is presented as a place, a real place, where real things happened, where the god walked the streets and held court, and sat with his wives and his counselors, and conducted the business of a kingdom the way any king conducts it, with the ordinary texture of a life lived in a particular city, in a particular time. And then Krishna died. The manner of his death is its own long story. He was in the forest, resting beneath a pipal tree, when an arrow found him. The archer was a hunter named Jara, whose name, in Sanskrit, means old age. He had mistaken Krishna's foot for the eye of a deer. The arrow, which would not have killed an ordinary man, found the one place on Krishna's body that was not fully protected by his divinity. Krishna told Jara he was forgiven, that this was as it should be, that the arrow was not a mistake, but a completion. He died, the texts say, with full awareness of what were happening, without resistance, without fear, the way someone dies when they have finished what they came to do and are simply returning to what they were before they came. 7 days later, the sea took Dwarka. The Mahabharata describes it with a simplicity that is more devastating than any elaboration. The sea rushed in. It covered the streets and the gardens and the harbour. It covered the palaces of crystal and silver and emerald. It covered the wish-fulfilling trees. The city went under. The water closed over it, and the age changed. In the Hindu understanding of time, history moves through 4 great ages, the yugas, each one a little darker and more difficult than the last. The age of Krita, when the world was pure. The age of Treta. The age of Dwapara, when Krishna walked the earth. And then Kali Yuga, the age we are in now. The darkest age. The age of conflict and forgetting, of moral confusion and spiritual poverty. The age that began, according to the tradition, when Krishna left the world. Dwarka did not sink as punishment. It did not sink because its people were proud, or because a gate was opened by the wrong hand, or because wealth had replaced wisdom. It sank because the force that had called it into being was gone. A city, perhaps, is only as real as the love that made it. When that love withdraws, when the presence that gave the place its meaning is no longer in it, what remains is stone and harbour, and the memory of gardens. Things the sea has no particular reason to spare. Dwarka sank as grief. The world's grief at the departure of something it could not replace. In 1983, a team of marine archaeologists began diving in the waters off the coast of the modern city of Dwarka, a real city in Gujarat, which has stood on this coast for centuries and has always maintained that it sits on the site of Krishna's lost city. What they found gave the legend an unexpected weight. Structures, walls, a city grid extending across the seabed in patterns that suggested deliberate construction rather than natural formation. Stone anchors of a type known from ancient harbours throughout the Indian Ocean world. Pottery, the evidence of human presence, human intention, human building, at a depth and in a location that placed it well below any ancient shoreline. Someone built something here, something large and planned. The sea did take it. Whether the god walked those streets, whether the wish-fulfilling trees grew in those gardens, whether Vishwakarma shaped those walls, is not a question that sonar can answer. But the memory was pointing at something real. The tradition that kept the name alive across thousands of years of telling was not pointing at nothing. There was a city. The water covered it. And the people who came after kept saying so, in the only language they had, the language of the sacred, the language of the god who played the flute on the riverbank, and then, one day, did not come back. Let the warm water of the Arabian Sea come into your imagination now. The light filtering down through it, green and gold and growing dark. The slow, unhurried movement of things far below the surface. The city down there, quiet and complete. Its gardens still, and its harbour still, and its palaces standing in the way that things stand when no one is disturbing them. The god has left, but the city remembers him. I think it always will. We travel north now, deep into Russia, into the interior, away from all coasts and all warmth, into the heart of a country that is mostly forest and mostly winter, and mostly the kind of silence that only very large, cold places produce. A silence that is not empty, but full of the sounds that silence is made of. Wind in pine trees, ice shifting on a frozen river, the particular quality of air in a place where human voices are rare. Here, on the map, is the last city in this section, the one I come back to most, the one I think about when the map is rolled up and put away, the one that made me understand what this whole section was really about. Its name is Kitezh. and it is hidden beneath a lake. Lake Svetloya, in the Nizhny Novgorod region of Russia. A small lake, by Russian standards, less than half a kilometer across. Circular, unusually deep. The water is clear in a way that the lakes around it are not, fed by springs that keep it clean and cold and still. People who visit it remark on the quality of the place. Something in the atmosphere of it, something that sits differently from ordinary landscape. A feeling, which visitors report even now, of standing at the edge of something that has not fully decided whether to be visible. The story of Kitezh is this. In the 13th century, the Mongol army swept through Russia. Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis, led his forces west and north through the Russian principalities, and what lay in their path was destroyed. Cities were burned, populations were killed or fled. The Russia of that century was a country being unmade, city by city, the old world ending in fire, and the terrible efficiency of a military force that had already conquered most of the known world and was not slowing down. Kitezh was different from the other Russian cities. It was a city of devout, a city where the people live quietly and well, in the forests near the lake, in the particular way that people live, when what matters to them is not power or wealth, but something smaller and harder to name. When word came that Batu Khan's army was approaching, they did not prepare weapons. They did not build higher walls, or send for reinforcements, or make the calculations of military resistance. They prayed, and the city vanished. Not in catastrophe, not in punishment, not with the violence of a wall of water, or the grinding of the earth. The city simply withdrew. The boundary between the visible world and some other world shifted, gently, the way a curtain shifts in a room when a window is opened somewhere else. And Kitezh stepped across that boundary, and the people in it stepped across with it. And when the Mongol army arrived, they found the shore of a lake, and the forest, and the silence. Nothing to conquer, nothing to burn. In the Russian Orthodox tradition, where this story has lived for centuries, carried through the liturgy and the icon and the oral memory of communities that refused to let it go. What happened to Kitezh is not a tragedy, it is a translation. God took the city out of harm's way, the way you move something precious before the storm arrives, before the careless hand can reach it. The people of Kitezh did not die. They are still there, in the invisible city beneath the lake, living the life they were living when the world stopped being able to see them. And they can be found. That is the part of this story that stops me every time. Pilgrims have been coming to Lake Svetloya for centuries. There are records of them from the 17th century, and the tradition is certainly older. People walking to the lake from great distances, in all weathers, on bare feet in some accounts, to do what pilgrims do. They walk around the lake 3 times. The circuit of the lake 3 times is held to be equivalent, in its spiritual weight, to a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They pray. They look into the water, and the ones who are pure of heart, the ones who have come to the lake with nothing to hide and nothing to prove, and nothing between themselves and the truth of what they are, they see it. The towers and the churches and the streets below the surface, the lights still burning in the windows of Kitezh, warm and steady, on the other side of the water. They hear the bells, not as the bells of Vineta are said to ring, slow and strange and distorted by the weight of water. The bells of Kitezh ring clearly, ring as they always rang, in a city that has not changed, in a world that does not decay. The ones whose hearts are not pure see only water. The story survived everything. It survived the revolution, which had no patience for saints and invisible cities and the religious imagination. It survived Soviet atheism, the decades when this kind of story was not merely unfashionable, but actively discouraged. And it survived in part because a composer named Rimsky-Korsakov made an opera of it in 1907, The Legend of the Invisible City of Kitezh, which kept the story alive in the concert halls and the opera houses, even when it could not be spoken of in the churches. Art doing what art does, carrying the thing that must not be lost through the years when loss seems certain. And the pilgrims kept coming, all through the Soviet years, to the lake in the forest, walking around it 3 times, looking into the clear, cold water, hoping. This is what Kitezh gives that no other city on this part of the map can give. All the others, Atlantis, Vineta, Weeks, Lyonesse, Dwarka, are gone. Whatever they were, they are not accessible. You cannot go there. You cannot find them. The loss is real, and the distance is permanent. But Kitezh is not gone. It is hidden, and there is a path to it. The path is the lake, walked 3 times with honesty. The path is the quality of your heart when you look into the water. The city is there. It is there right now, lit and inhabited and ringing, on the other side of the surface that separates the visible world from the one underneath. You just have to be the kind of person who can see it. I find that in the dark, at the end of a long evening of drowned cities and lost lands, I find that almost unbearably moving. The idea that the beautiful things do not disappear. They go somewhere the destroyers cannot reach. They wait. And the way back to them is not through effort or intelligence or the right equipment. The way back is through the quality of what you carry inside you when you come to the edge of the water. That may be the oldest story there is. Let the lake be still now. Let the reflection on its surface hold whatever it holds. Let the city below the surface continue, quietly, in its own light. You do not need to see it tonight. You only need to know it is there. I'm rolling the map up now, slowly, carefully. The parchment makes a sound like something breathing as it curls back into itself, like something returning to sleep after a long night of being awake and seen. We have visited 5 cities tonight, 5 places that the water took, or the earth took, or the space between the visible and the invisible took. 5 places that people built and loved and lost, and spent generations remembering. Atlantis, which sank in punishment and left us with a word for everything we lose to our own pride, and left us too with the need to keep looking for it, which may be more important than finding it. Vineta, the great Baltic city whose bells still ring in the cold grey water, still marking the hours of a city that no longer needs to mark hours, still calling to people who can no longer hear. Yes, the city at the edge of Brittany, whose gate was opened and whose daughter went into the water and became something else, something that the sea made of her, or something she always was, finally free. Lyonesse, the quiet land between Cornwall and the islands, which slipped under without explanation, without lesson, without anyone to blame. The hardest story. The truest one, maybe. Dwarka, the city a god built to keep his people safe, and which the world could not sustain after he left it. The city that sank not as punishment, but as grief, the world's grief. And Kitezh, which did not sink as punishment or tragedy or the indifference of tectonic plates. Kitezh, which was hidden, preserved, translated, taken somewhere the destroyers could not follow, still lit, still ringing, visible to those who come to the water with honesty in their hearts. I keep coming back to Kitezh. I keep coming back to what it offers, that the others do not. Not the consolation of a reason, but the consolation of a door. The possibility that what is lost is not destroyed, that it is simply elsewhere, that the beautiful things and the good ones, and the ones built with love and inhabited with care, do not end. They become harder to see. The map is here, on the table. The next time I unroll it, we will visit different cities, cities that no road leads to, cities that the human imagination has been searching for across deserts and oceans and centuries of longing. But that is for another night. Tonight, let the cities go dark, one by one, gently. The way lights go out at the end of an evening when everyone has finally gone home. Atlantis, Vineta, Ius, Lyonesse, Dwarka, Kitezh. The map is rolled up. The room is quiet. Outside, the world is doing whatever the world does at this hour, turning slowly on its axis, holding its cities on its surface, keeping its cities beneath the surface, patient with all of them. You are warm. You are safe. The water is very far away. Sleep now. Sleep.